They scheduled their vacation during my chemo treatments and said, "It's not the best time to focus on your drama." My own daughter and her husband making it clear I was a burden. My hands shake, but I don't cry. Still, I feel the sting of their words deep in my chest. As I sit there, the weight of their indifference sinking in, I make a decision. While their names linger on my phone screen, I erase them from the future they thought they controlled. The silence is final, and they'll never know what they lost. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Delia was told the chemo would take 12 weeks. Every Friday for 3 months. She sent Hannah a message with the schedule, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed, "Hey, chemo starts Friday. It's a 12-week treatment, just letting you know." She stared at the screen, waiting. No reply. 2 days later, her phone buzzed. Hannah's Instagram post appeared. A beach selfie, her eyes squinting against the sun. A perfect picture of carefree. The caption read, "Time for sunshine and soul work." Delia felt her pulse quicken. Soul work? While she'd be sitting in a cold clinic, hooked up to an IV, she exhaled and called. Brad picked up. "Delia, what's up?" "I sent Hannah the chemo schedule. Didn't hear back," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Brad paused. "Look, can we talk after we get back? It's not the best time to focus on your drama." Her drama. Delia's breath hitched. She wanted to scream, to ask him how he could be so callous. But she said nothing, just ended the call. Bobby arrived at her house an hour later, with ginger chews and her usual quiet understanding. Delia didn't need to explain. Bobby didn't ask. She simply helped Delia into her car, offering a reassuring, wordless presence. The drive to the clinic was a blur. The streets of Fort Collins seemed far away, like they belonged to a life she could no longer touch. She tried not to think about her children, about Hannah and Marcus, about how their priorities didn't seem to line up with hers. The clinic was just as sterile as always. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Delia checked in, took a seat, and tried to block out the hum of voices. She needed to center herself, focus on the fight ahead. Then a voice cut through the noise. "Delia?" She looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Callie, now an oncology nurse, her scrubs neatly pressed, a warm smile on her face. It had been years since Delia had seen her, but there was something comforting about the familiarity in Callie's eyes. "Callie," Delia's voice cracked as she stood to greet her. Callie smiled softly. "I'm so glad to see you here. How are you?" Delia hesitated, then forced herself to speak. "I'm doing what I have to do." Callie sat down beside her, offering a quiet, unspoken comfort. They didn't need to talk about the illness, not yet. Instead, they shared a moment of silent understanding. It was the kind of peace Delia didn't get from anyone else. But just as she allowed herself to relax, the door swung open with a jarring thud. Laughter and chatter spilled into the room. Hannah walked in, her phone in hand, too absorbed in her screen to notice Delia. Her voice, bright and carefree, filled the space like it was the most natural thing in the world. Delia's stomach twisted. "Here? Now?" She stood, trying to ignore the sudden ache in her chest. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Delia Rayburn." The moment broke. Delia's gaze lingered on Hannah, who was still scrolling. The world, it seemed, had moved on without her. As Delia followed the nurse, a quiet thought echoed in her mind. This is not how I end. Delia sat at the kitchen table, the papers in front of her scattered like pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she could put together. The soft morning light filtered through the window, casting a warm glow over the thick stack of documents. Each page seemed heavier than the last. Bank statements, retirement plans, a home title. Everything she had worked for, built over decades. She ran her fingers over the papers, wondering just how much of it would be hers in the end. She picked up the home title and traced her name at the top. Rayburn. It had been her name for years, her life, her choices. But now, it felt like a name on a page she wasn't sure she could keep. Her eyes shifted to the bank statements next. She knew the numbers by heart, but seeing them laid out like this made it all feel so final. What happens if I don't make it through this? She paused. Her hand hovered over the financial planner's report. The future laid out in neat projections. The numbers didn't matter, but what still mattered was how she'd gotten here. Her mind drifted back to when she'd co-signed Hannah's grad school loans. She had done it without hesitation, thinking it would be an investment in her daughter's future. But Brad, always distant, had never paid her back. Delia had been too proud to ask. Now, with every monthly payment, it felt like a weight around her neck. You raised them. Doesn't mean you owe them. The words echoed in her head, Bobby's voice clear as she'd said them last week when they had talked about Delia's financial plans. Bobby had a way of simplifying things, getting to the heart of the matter. And maybe, for once, Delia needed to hear it. You don't owe them anything. Her fingers shook as she picked up the phone and dialed Callie. The conversation felt like a blur, and soon they had plans to meet for lunch. Delia's stomach churned, but she pushed the discomfort aside. It had been years since they'd had a proper conversation outside the classroom. Callie, after all, wasn't just a former student anymore. She was an oncology nurse, one who had seen the dark side of life, but still managed to hold on to her light. Delia was drawn to that. The restaurant was small and quiet, tucked away in the corner of a downtown street. Callie was already there when Delia arrived, sipping iced tea and looking out the window with a calm expression. Delia took the seat across from her, hesitant but relieved. How's the nonprofit? Delia asked after they exchanged greetings. Callie smiled. We're doing good. It's called Single Support. We provide resources for patients who don't have anyone to advocate for them. We focus on emotional and financial help, connecting people with the right kind of care. Delia's eyes softened. There was something deeply moving about the work Callie was doing. I didn't know you were involved in something like that. Callie leaned forward, her tone more earnest now. I started it after I lost my mom. She went through cancer treatments alone, and no one ever showed up for her like they should have. I don't want anyone else to feel that way. I want to be the one who shows up when no one else does. Delia took a slow breath, feeling the weight of her own isolation creeping back. She hadn't realized just how much she had relied on others to show up for her, until they hadn't. Callie's voice broke through her thoughts. Just say the word, Delia. I'll show up. For you. Delia blinked. The offer was simple, but it felt like a lifeline. She swallowed, unsure of how to respond. But before she could speak, Callie added, and if you ever need help with anything, I've got connections. Lawyers, financial people, you name it. The offer wasn't lost on Delia. She knew what it was like to have someone take charge when everything was falling apart. Maybe this time it could be me, Delia thought. That afternoon after lunch, Delia took a quiet walk. Her mind was racing. It was clear that she couldn't rely on Hannah or Marcus. They were too wrapped up in their own lives, too absorbed in their own drama. The next morning, Delia made a decision. She pulled out the contact details for Ari Feldman, the estate lawyer she had been avoiding. Delia had never needed someone like him before, but things were different now. She couldn't leave everything up to chance anymore. She called his office and set up an appointment for the following week. When the intake form came through, she hesitated for only a second before leaving Hannah and Marcus off. They didn't deserve a place in her future, not the way they had behaved. She didn't even write their names. The form felt like a statement, a line in the sand. And Delia, for the first time in a long time, felt like she was finally making a choice for herself. As she signed the form, the weight of the decision settled over her. This was the path she was walking now. It was no longer about waiting for others to show up. It was about showing up for herself. Delia walked into Ari Feldman's office with a sense of purpose. The weight of her decision sat heavily on her shoulders, but there was clarity in it. This was the moment where everything shifted. The room smelled of polished wood and leather, everything in its place. Order, control, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Ari stood when she entered, offering a warm, efficient smile. His sharp suit and calm demeanor gave off an air of authority. Delia? I assume you're here to lock things down, he said, settling into his chair. Delia nodded. Yes, I want everything locked down, but quietly. Ari raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He was used to people wanting discretion, and Delia wasn't the first to seek his services when things went sideways with family. He laid out a series of documents. each one marking a new chapter in the story of Delia's life, one she would control. A living trust is the best option, Aries said, flipping through papers. This way, your assets transfer smoothly, without the delays or prying eyes of probate. Delia's hands tightened on the armrests. Prying eyes, she could already picture them. Her children's greedy glances, their sense of entitlement. The ones who hadn't shown up when it mattered. Ari's fingers moved over the documents. We'll start by removing Hannah and Marcus from your healthcare and financial power of attorney, he said, his voice soft but certain. They have no place in these decisions. Delia's chest tightened. The reality of what she was doing, the permanent nature of it, settled like a stone in her stomach. But there was no going back. Not anymore. We're not cutting them out of anger, Ari added, glancing up from the papers. We're choosing peace. Peace. Delia repeated the word silently. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She was simply done. Ari continued, outlining how the living trust would work, how everything from her home to her savings could be directed to causes she cared about, far removed from the influence of a family that had abandoned her. The money wouldn't go to them. It would go to elder care housing grants for those who had no one else, for the ones who truly needed help. Delia nodded, her mind clear now. There was no hesitation, no looking back. The people who had stayed by her side, Callie and Bobby, would be the ones who helped manage her legacy. Callie will be backup trustee, Ari said, writing it down, and Bobby as power of attorney. These are the people you trust. And that trust will carry on. Delia watched him write the names, feeling a strange peace settle within her. This was what she'd been waiting for. The real choices, the ones that mattered, were finally in her hands. Ari handed her the final documents. Once these are signed, everything will be in place. You'll have control, total control, over what happens to your assets. Delia took the papers, her fingers brushing the edges. It was official now. The future she'd worked so hard for, the future she was going to protect, would be hers and hers alone. She looked up at Ari. It's done? He gave a small, approving smile. It's done. Delia stood, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. As she left his office, she felt a new kind of clarity, a new kind of strength. For the first time in a long time, she was walking toward her own future, with no one to answer to but herself. But as the door closed behind her, a fleeting thought passed through her mind. How would they react when they found out? And with that, the quiet tension of what was to come settled into her bones. Delia stood in the kitchen, staring at the house she had built. Every brick, every corner held memories, but it was more than just a house. It was her sanctuary, the last thing she could call her own. Brad's voice broke the silence. You know, Delia, the equity in this place could help everyone. I mean, if things get worse, we could all use it. Delia didn't turn to face him. She could already hear the unspoken implication that he thought he could dip into her resources. I'm not dying, Brad, but some things are. Her voice was quiet but firm, heavy with the weight of the truth she wasn't sure he could understand. Brad paused, as if considering his words. Well, if you don't need all this space when things get worse, it might be a good idea to think about downsizing. For all of us. She turned slowly, locking eyes with him. No, she said sharply. Not happening. Brad's expression hardened. He always thought he could make decisions for her, for them. But Delia was done letting him call the shots. I'll let you think about it, he said, backing away as if the issue would resolve itself. The moment he left, Delia pulled out her phone and texted Ari. The cease and desist letter had been on her mind for days, and she wasn't about to let Brad push her any further. She hit send without hesitation, ensuring that no one, least of all Brad, could manipulate her finances without facing consequences. Later that evening, Marcus finally replied to a group chat they'd all been part of. His message came 3 days late. Just loop me in if it's serious. Delia stared at the screen for a long moment, then put the phone down. What would be the point? He wasn't here. He hadn't been here. She didn't need his empty words. Bobby arrived around sunset, carrying a toolbox and a Ring camera. She set to work without question, as if installing security cameras on Delia's front porch was just another normal task for the day. You're not the only one who needs to lock things down, Bobby said, half smiling as she worked. Delia nodded, appreciating Bobby's practical approach. Bobby wasn't here to offer empty assurances. She was here because she knew how to take action when it mattered. In a way, Delia thought, Bobby had already become more family than anyone who had shared her blood. When Bobby finished, Delia stood at the door, her hand on the knob, and gazed out at her home. It felt safer now, even if the camera was just a small step. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was an email from the bank, the subject line reading, "Notice of unauthorized withdrawal." Delia opened the email with a sinking feeling. Someone had tried to access her accounts. Again. She felt her pulse quicken as she looked at Bobby. "I'll take care of it," Delia said, her voice steady, but there was a fierce undercurrent of resolve she hadn't felt before. This was her house, her life. No one was going to take it from her, not without a fight. Delia sat at the kitchen table, stirring her coffee, her mind elsewhere. She wasn't used to this quiet space, but it felt right. Peaceful, almost. The doorbell rang, breaking the stillness. Callie stood there, holding a bag of ginger chews and a box of tea. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice soft. "Of course," Delia said, stepping aside. They settled at the table. Callie's expression was warm, but there was something more serious in her eyes. "I've been thinking about you and your care," she began. "I could help. I could become your paid caregiver if you want. It's entirely your choice." Delia raised an eyebrow, surprised by the offer. She'd always known Callie had a heart for service, but to hear it so plainly was different. "I'm not hiring help," Delia said after a pause, her voice calm but firm. "I'm investing in loyalty." Callie's eyes softened, understanding exactly what Delia meant. "I get it. But what if we made it official? I could be your care trustee, someone who can make medical decisions if you're ever unable." Delia felt a strange sense of relief at the thought. Callie wasn't just offering help. She was offering trust, something Delia hadn't had from her own children. "All right," Delia said, nodding. "Let's have Ari draw up the paperwork." Callie smiled, visibly relieved. "I'll do whatever you need." Later that day, as Delia scrolled through her phone, she saw a post from Hannah. It was a throwback reel, one of those perfectly curated moments of laughter and light, with a caption that read, "Don't let other people's chaos pull your light down boundaries." Delia's lips tightened. Boundaries, a word Hannah liked to throw around. Delia tapped the post, her eyes scanning the picture of her daughter, blissfully unaware. Bobby's comment came almost instantly. "You spelled abandonment wrong." Delia couldn't help but smile at Bobby's bluntness. She was the kind of friend who called things as they were, no pretenses. Delia's attention shifted to another notification. An email from the storage unit. It was time. Time to let go of Hannah's things. They had been sitting there, reminders of a life that wasn't coming back. She didn't hesitate. A few clicks, and the donation request was in. Furniture from her daughter's old room, gone, to a domestic violence shelter. Let someone else make use of it. The next day, Delia met with Ari. It was time to make everything official. She signed the papers for the living trust, the power of attorney, and the care trustee agreement. It was a legal line in the sand, her future, not theirs. As Ari handed her the final documents, she felt the weight of her decision. This wasn't anger, it was clarity. She didn't need anyone's approval anymore. Later that evening, Delia stood in the living room, looking around at the empty space where Hannah's furniture had been. It felt lighter now, it felt free. As the door clicked shut behind her, Delia knew this was her life now. And no one, not Brad, not Marcus, and certainly not Hannah, could change that. Delia stared at Brad's text on her phone. "Let's talk soon, okay? We need to keep things in the family." The words tugged at her, but only a little. She didn't reply. Instead, she turned to the counter where the ingredients for banana bread were neatly laid out. Baking had always been a comfort for her, a small, simple act that grounded her. As the dough mixed together, the quiet of the kitchen felt right. Callie had shown up for her in a way no one else had. Loyalty, that's what mattered now. The doorbell rang, breaking her concentration. Callie stood in the doorway, holding a bag of ginger chews and a box of tea. She smiled, but Delia could see the concern in her eyes. "Hi," Callie said, stepping inside. "I brought these for you. How's everything going?" Delia offered a faint smile. "Better now. I've been baking. Can you stay for a while?" "Of course." Callie sat down at the table, her gaze soft as she watched Delia finish the loaf. "I've been thinking," Callie began after a beat, "about helping you. I could be your paid caregiver, but only if you want. I do it because I care, not out of obligation." Delia paused, her hands stilling. The offer felt different from others. "I'm not hiring help," she said, the words firm. "I'm investing in loyalty." Callie's smile deepened, and there was understanding in her eyes. "I get it, but I could also help officially. I could be your care trustee. I'd make medical decisions if you couldn't." Delia took a slow breath, considering it. It was a solid offer, trust, something her own children hadn't shown. "All right," she said finally. "Let's have Ari draw up the paperwork." Callie nodded, relieved. "I'll do whatever you need." Later that day, as Delia scrolled through her phone, she saw a post from Hannah. It was a throwback reel with a caption, "Don't let other people's chaos pull your light down, knock her boundaries." Delia's stomach tightened. Boundaries. It was the word Hannah always used when it was convenient, when it fit her narrative. She tapped the post, her eyes scanning the smiling face of her daughter, so far removed from the reality Delia had been living. Bobby's comment came a moment later. "You spelled abandonment wrong." Delia smiled despite herself. Bobby always cut straight to the heart of it. A notification popped up. A message from the storage unit. It was time. Time to let go of the remnants of a life that had been lost. She clicked through, donating everything in Hannah's storage to a domestic violence shelter. Let someone else make use of it. The next day, Delia met with Ari to finalize the details. The papers for the amended will were ready. Her living trust, the power of attorney, and the care trustee agreement. It felt final, official. She wasn't angry, just certain. This was her life, her decisions, and it was time to stop letting others dictate it. As Ari handed her the final documents, Delia felt a weight lift. She wasn't just signing papers, she was taking control. The people who had stayed by her side, Callie, Bobby, would be entrusted with everything she had. Those who hadn't, they wouldn't even be able to challenge it. Later that evening, Delia stood in the living room, looking at the empty space where Hannah's old furniture had been. It was lighter now, quieter. She felt free. As the door clicked shut behind her, Delia knew it was done. No more questions, no more hesitation. Her future was finally her own. Delia sat in her favorite armchair, the dim light of the afternoon filtering through the curtains as she scrolled through the document. It was the kind of thing she'd never thought she'd see. Suggestions about her end of life. Cremation cost splitting. Who gets the ring? The details were painfully impersonal. Her children, or the versions of them that still lingered in her mind, had created a list of potential outcomes, as if they were planning a party for someone who hadn't yet left. She stared at the list, feeling the absurdity of it all settle over her. A celebration of life they had written. The phrase stung like an afterthought. They had no idea what it really meant to live, let alone to honor a life that had been constantly overshadowed by their neglect. Her name appeared just once in the entire document, at the very bottom, tucked in among the suggestions for the division of her belongings. It was as if they thought she wouldn't mind, as if they had assumed it would all be sorted without her input, without her consent. She paused, the screen blurring for a moment as the weight of her isolation hit. Her name, forgotten or maybe dismissed, was buried beneath their casual assumptions. It made sense, though. It mirrored the way they had treated her for years, always there, but never truly present. Ari had advised her not to worry about the will. The document could be amended, adjusted, corrected. But even he had warned her when they started that this kind of thing often happens in families. People make plans based on what they want, not what the person who matters most would ever choose. Ari had seen it all before, and there was nothing surprising about what she was reading. It was business, at its most cold and efficient. But Delia had learned something over the past few weeks. Business wasn't what she was interested in anymore. She closed the document and picked up her phone. The words on the screen were clear. Interesting reading. She hit send without hesitation, forwarding it to Bobby. It took less than a minute before Bobby's reply came in. A quick, no-nonsense response. "Sounds like they think you're dead already." Delia smiled bitterly at the text. Yes, she thought. That's exactly it. But Bobby was right, and Delia wasn't going to let anyone walk all over her legacy. Not anymore. She set the phone down, stood up, and walked over to her desk. Her trust needed an update, and it needed to be done now. Delia pulled open the folder where the most recent version of her trust lay. Her fingers hesitated as she read over the details. The lists of people she'd designated as beneficiaries. The power of attorney. It wasn't right. There was one name missing, one person who had proven herself more than anyone else. With a deliberate hand, Delia amended the trust, adding a provision to fund scholarships for family caregivers. Callie would be the one to oversee the fund. She deserved that responsibility. She was the one who had shown up, not Brad, not Marcus, and certainly not Hannah. Callie had shown up with heart, with compassion, and that was worth more than any material possession. As Delia signed the amendment, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The document that would control her legacy was no longer a list of what her children thought they could control. It was about what Delia wanted to leave behind. It was about recognizing who had actually been there for her. Delia tucked the updated trust into an envelope, her fingers brushing the paper. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was her decision, her life. And now, even in the face of their indifference, she would leave behind something meaningful, something that had nothing to do with them. But as she placed the envelope in the drawer, something inside her stirred, a sharp realization. Even though she had taken control, even though everything was officially in place, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. What would they do when they finally found out? As the evening crept in, Delia stood at the window, watching the last light of day fade. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she was ready. This time, she wasn't afraid. Delia opened the door to find Brad standing there, his arms folded, looking as if he had every right to be on her doorstep. "Delia," he began, the words already feeling heavy. "The rental fell through. We need to stay here for a few weeks. We'll keep it quiet." Delia's stomach tightened at the audacity of his request. It wasn't even the fact that he needed somewhere to stay. It was the assumption. The belief that he could still ask for what he wanted. That the roof over her head was still theirs to claim. She took a breath, then met his eyes. "No." Brad blinked, clearly thrown by the finality in her tone. "It's just for a little while," he pressed. "You won't even know we're here." "No," she repeated, calm and unyielding. Her hand rested lightly on the door, her space, her boundaries. Without another word, she closed the door, cutting off any further explanation or negotiation. The silence in the house afterward was almost deafening. She didn't regret it. She had made her decision. Her phone buzzed minutes later. "Hannah. What's the deal with Mom? You're pushing everyone away. It's just a few weeks. Why are you making it a big deal?" Delia's fingers hovered over the screen. The urge to justify herself was there, but she resisted. She didn't need to explain herself, not anymore. Her response was short and final. "No, not happening." She set the phone down. It wasn't long before another notification flashed on her screen. "Bobby, you're right. They think you're dead already." Delia couldn't help but smile. Bobby always knew how to cut through the nonsense. She forwarded the will document to her friend without hesitation. The absurdity of it all felt too much to bear, but Bobby's bluntness made it easier to see. Later, Delia stood in the kitchen, staring at the clutter of old furniture in the corner. Hannah's old things. Pieces of a life that had already moved on. Pieces that didn't belong to her anymore. It was time. She clicked through the donation page and sent everything from the storage unit to a local shelter. Let someone else make use of it. She didn't need reminders of a daughter who'd only ever shown up when it was convenient. The doorbell rang again, and this time, Callie stood on the other side, holding a key in her hand. "I changed the locks," Callie said simply, a quiet smile on her face. Delia's chest loosened. This was the support she needed. No strings, no expectations, just a friend showing up. She took the key with a wordless thanks. Bobby showed up shortly after with a wooden porch sign that read, "Peace lives here. Guests knock with respect." I thought you might like it, Bobby said, placing it in Delia's hands. Delia's lips curved into a smile. It's perfect, she said, taking the sign and hanging it above the door. It felt like a declaration, one she hadn't realized she needed until now. Callie was watching her from the door, sensing the shift. You're ready for this, she said softly. I am, Delia replied, her voice steady. I'm done letting them take up space here. Later, Marcus texted. A thumbs-up emoji, then. Heard about the blow-up. Let me know if it's serious. Delia stared at the screen for a long moment, then put the phone down without replying. Marcus had never been there when it mattered, never showed up when she needed him. Now he wanted to be involved, but it was too little, too late. She didn't need anyone else to define her choices. This was her house, her life, and the people who truly mattered had already proven themselves. Delia stepped back, taking in the quiet, the peace that had settled in the house. It was hers now, truly hers. Delia stared at the post on her phone screen, the words stinging more than they should have. It was a photo of her, a cropped shot from a distance. The caption read, "When you choose chaos, don't drag others into it. Set your boundaries. Choose peace." Her stomach twisted. This was the part of the pattern she knew too well. Hannah using social media to manipulate, to create a narrative that painted Delia as the villain. It wasn't the first time, but this time, something inside her shifted. Delia didn't respond. Instead, she opened her settings and blocked Hannah's account. The notification disappeared, and with it, the need to explain herself. No more justifying, no more trying to fit into a box she never belonged in. A ping on her phone caught her attention. It was Bobby. "Theater, they think you're dead already." Delia smiled bitterly, reading Bobby's text. Bobby had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things. Delia forwarded the post to her, then set the phone down. It wasn't about Hannah anymore. It was about her. The next morning, Delia woke to a message from Ari. He'd sent her a link with a note. "Document these attempts. Digital shaming is a tactic. Keep everything." She read his message and then the article on digital manipulation. Ari was right. She'd been too passive for too long. She needed to protect herself, even from those she'd loved the most. She saved a screenshot of the post. The evidence would be there if needed. In the kitchen, Callie arrived with a folder. She laid it on the counter and handed Delia a printout of her medical schedule. "You've got more important things to read," she said, tacking it to the fridge with a magnet. Delia felt a sense of relief wash over her. The noise of the outside world, of social media and family drama, no longer mattered. She had people who cared, people who showed up. Callie had always been there, never asking for anything in return. Just quietly taking care of what needed to be done. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Marcus. Delia answered it, her heart heavy. "Mom, this feels extreme," Marcus said, his voice distant. "Why are you pushing everyone away? It's just a few weeks. Why not let us in?" Delia's grip tightened on the phone. He didn't get it. He never had. He hadn't been there when it mattered. She exhaled slowly before responding. So did being left alone during chemo. The silence on the other end was deafening. Marcus never replied. Delia ended the call, feeling the weight of the moment. She wasn't going to explain herself anymore. She wasn't going to beg for their understanding. This was the line she had drawn, and no one would cross it. She set the phone down, looking around the kitchen. It felt quieter now, the space around her clearer. For the first time in a long time, Delia could breathe, knowing she had made the right choice for herself. No more trying to fit into a life that wasn't hers to live. The letter arrived 3 days after the call from Marcus. It was from Ari, succinct, to the point, and in many ways, more reassuring than Delia had anticipated. She unfolded it, her fingers trembling as she read the brief lines. "You are not a party to the trust. You are not entitled to any disclosure." She read it again, savoring the weight of those words. They weren't just legalese. They were a final barrier, a clear statement of her choices, her decisions, protected and sealed. There would be no more arguments, no more claims that she was being unfair or unreasonable. Her will was her own, and that was final. Delia set the letter down on the table, feeling the calm settle over her, but the peace didn't last long. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from Twitter. She clicked it open and immediately saw a thread from Hannah, filled with venom. Elder abuse. Cutting me out of the will because I'm standing up for my own boundaries. It's heartbreaking. Delia exhaled through her nose. Here we go again, she thought. Bobby, ever the swift and irreverent ally, had already replied. The text was brief, sharp, and exactly what Delia needed to read. Girl, stop. There was no need for further explanation, no justification. Bobby's words were like a cut to the heart of it all. Delia set the phone down, her fingers steady as they traced the edge of the table. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her once again, the same weight that had hovered over her for years. The family drama, the constant manipulation. But now she could finally breathe. No matter what Hannah or anyone else said. Delia was no longer bound by their demands. She was free. Later that afternoon, Callie arrived, bringing with her a simple but important task, the legacy video. It had been Delia's idea, but Callie had made it real, helping her through the process, guiding her through what she wanted to say and how she wanted it to be heard. Callie set up the camera in the living room, her movements calm and methodical. 2 versions, remember, she said, looking at Delia with that steady, unwavering gaze. One for them, one for you. Delia nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking directly into the camera. She spoke to the family first, offering a brief, composed message. I've made my choices. I've lived my life the way I wanted to. The people who have shown up for me are the ones who will carry my legacy forward. She paused, watching herself on the screen. It wasn't for them. This was for her. The second version was different. It was just for Delia, a letter to herself. She spoke more freely this time, her voice raw. I'm not your storyline. I'm my own survival. The words felt right, as if they had been building up for years, only now coming to fruition. After the recording was done, Delia felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't just the video. It was the finality of it all. This was her truth. No one else could write it for her. Later that evening, she went into the garden. The soil was soft beneath her hands as she knelt down, planting tulip bulbs along the fence. The sky was fading to a soft pink, and the quiet of the evening felt right. She gently pressed the bulbs into the earth, the cool dirt gathering around her fingertips. Next spring will be beautiful, Delia murmured to herself, with or without them. She wasn't just planting flowers. She was planting hope for herself, for the future she was building. As the last bulb went into the ground, Delia stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees. She felt lighter now, ready to face whatever came next. No more guilt, no more expectations from those who hadn't shown up for her. The past was behind her. And as the night fell, she stood there, looking out at the garden she had tended with care, her heart finally at peace. The doorbell rang with an all-too-familiar chime. Delia's heart didn't race this time, but her pulse quickened slightly, a reflex more than a feeling. She already knew who it was. Marcus. She opened the door to find him standing there, holding a plastic-wrapped package of store-bought cookies in his hands, the awkward energy between them palpable. He looked just like he always had, distant, slightly uncomfortable, unsure of how to bridge the gap that had existed between them for years. Hey, Mom, he said, avoiding her eyes. Brought you these. He handed her the cookies, the bright pink ribbon wrapping them too perfect to be genuine. Delia took them without a word, looking at the package before glancing back up at him. You could have at least baked them yourself, she said dryly, setting the cookies aside. Marcus half smiled, a tight, nervous smile, as if he were still trying to figure out what role he should be playing in her life. He cleared his throat. I wasn't sure if you were up for that, he said, shifting on his feet. Delia nodded, though she didn't agree. It was never about the cookies. It was about everything unsaid, everything unacknowledged. She gave a slight nod toward the living room, silently inviting him in. They moved through the house slowly, Marcus glancing around like someone visiting a museum, unsure whether he was allowed to touch anything. So, how's everything? Marcus asked, his voice lacking the warmth of real concern. His eyes didn't meet hers, his gaze darting instead to the empty corners of the house, as if searching for something to latch onto. Delia let the silence hang in the air for a moment before replying. I'm fine, he nodded, but didn't seem to believe it. Delia could tell by the way he hesitated, by the way his eyes flicked to the walls, the furniture, the space around them. Finally, he asked the question that had been waiting to spill out. The one he'd really come here to ask. "So, what's the house worth now?" Delia froze for a moment. She had expected this, though she didn't know when. It had been years since he'd shown any real interest in her well-being, but now that the house had become something tangible, something of value, he was interested. "Do you really think that's the most important question right now?" Delia asked quietly, her voice flat. She didn't need to spell it out. She knew what had always mattered to him, her money, her house, her assets. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but didn't respond. Instead, he followed her as she began to move through the house, giving him the impromptu tour he'd probably been waiting for. They passed through the living room, the kitchen, and into the hallway. But it was when they reached the desk that Delia stopped, turning to face him. She slid open the drawer and pulled out the binder that held her trust, her will, the final documents that cemented everything. "This is the most important thing," Delia said, her tone steady but firm as she handed him the binder. "This is what matters now." Marcus took the binder, his fingers gliding over it, but it wasn't curiosity that drove him. It was the same detached energy he always carried when it came to her, always more concerned with logistics than emotions, with ownership rather than connection. Delia didn't need to ask if he understood. She could see it in his face, his flickering glance at the pages before he snapped it shut, the awkwardness of his presence growing heavier. "I'm not leaving much behind for those who left me alone," Delia said, her voice sharp, cutting through the space between them. The truth was simple, the trust, the decisions. It had all been about creating something solid for herself, something that would protect her, even when they wouldn't. Marcus's eyebrows furrowed as if he didn't quite understand. Then he let out a low chuckle. "Wow, so this is permanent." Delia's gaze was steady as she met his eyes. "So was your absence." The words were a blow, a final declaration. For years she had waited for him to show up, to care, to finally make an effort. And for years, he hadn't. She was done waiting. Marcus shifted on his feet, his discomfort growing. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to face her anymore. She had set her boundary, and unlike the past, she wasn't backing down. He glanced at the binder one more time, but his eyes were distant, like he was already moving on to the next thing, probably the next excuse for why he hadn't been present. "I guess I'll let you get back to it," he said awkwardly, not meeting her eyes as he turned to leave. Delia watched him go. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence returned to the house. It was quieter now, and Delia felt the weight of the moment settle into her chest. She wasn't angry anymore. She didn't need to be. It was just the way it was. She stepped away from the door, feeling the space around her clear, the peace she'd fought so hard to create finally settling in. The brochure sat on the kitchen table, its glossy cover a stark reminder of what they had tried to push onto her. "End-of-Life Transitions," the title read, with soft pastel colors that seemed out of place. Delia flipped it open, her fingers tracing the edges of the pamphlet like it was a relic she was meant to consider. There was a photo of a peaceful garden, a gentle path leading toward the horizon, and lines about preparing for the inevitable. She could hear Marcus's voice echoing in her head. "Just think about it, Mom. It's easier this way." She flipped through the pages, pausing on the section about assisted living and transitions. It was all neatly packaged, a nice, sanitized version of what the world seemed to think would be her fate. But she wasn't dying, not today, not tomorrow. Delia circled the words "End-of-Life Transitions" with a ballpoint pen, the ink sharp against the glossy paper. Then she put the brochure down, walked over to the counter, and picked up the sticky notepad. Without a word, she slapped a sticky note on the cover of the brochure. Wrong address. She didn't need to say anything else. She folded the brochure, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it to Marcus. Then she dropped it in the mailbox without a second thought. Let him try again. The mailbox was locked with a click that echoed through her quiet street. That's it, she thought, watching the envelope slip into the box, the finality of it settling over her. She wasn't just rejecting their plans for her future. She was rejecting the entire narrative they had constructed. Later that day, Delia stood at the edge of her backyard, her hand resting on the wooden fence. The sun was low, casting a warm glow over the garden she had carefully tended, a symbol of everything she'd built for herself. Callie had arranged for a small brunch, a gathering of caregivers and people from the nonprofit Callie worked for, those who understood what it meant to show up for someone without expectation, without judgment. Bobby had arrived early, helping Delia set up. She was tying a tablecloth to the back of a chair when Delia came out with the final tray of food. Bobby shot her a wink. "Don't think about them," she said, taking the tray from Delia's hands. "This is your day. You've earned it." The brunch was small but full of warmth, the conversations light and filled with understanding. Callie moved through the crowd, introducing people to each other, offering her calm and steady presence. There was no drama, no tension, just people being present. Delia found herself relaxing, enjoying the company of those who had supported her without hesitation. Just as the last few guests began to gather their things, Delia felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Ari stepping quietly through the garden gate, holding a binder in his hands. "You've been busy," Ari said, with a knowing smile. He handed her the binder, final certified copy, untouchable. Delia took the binder from him, her fingers brushing over the sleek, cold cover. She could feel the weight of it, literally and metaphorically, the finality of it all. She'd done it. She'd built something that would outlast the chaos, something that no one, not even her own family, could tear down. Ari stepped back, giving her space to absorb it. "This is yours," he said, his voice calm and assuring. "Everything's locked down." Delia nodded, her chest tight with both relief and the quiet sadness that lingered. She handed the binder to Callie, who had been standing nearby, her eyes soft with understanding. Callie took it without hesitation, holding it close as if it was something sacred. "I want you to have this," Delia said, her voice low but resolute. "In case something happens, it's yours now." Callie nodded and took the binder, her expression sincere. She knew what it meant. This was her responsibility now. No one else had earned it. Delia walked to the back of the garden, where the last of the tulips were beginning to bloom, the fresh shoots pushing through the soil. She knelt down and carefully examined the flowers she had planted so many months ago. The quiet beauty of it, the way everything had grown without force, without rush, gave her a deep sense of peace. She ran her fingers over the tender petals of one bloom. "Next spring will be beautiful," she whispered to herself, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips, with or without them. Standing up, Delia felt lighter, the heaviness of years of worry finally lifting. She wasn't just planting flowers. She was planting hope. For the future, for herself, and for the legacy she had carefully cultivated, one decision at a time. She returned to the gathering, where Bobby and Callie were speaking quietly, their conversation soft and filled with understanding. Delia knew that what she had was enough. She had built it herself, brick by brick, and nothing, no one, could take that from her now. The court was colder than Delia had expected, the air thick with anticipation as she sat in the quiet of the sterile room. She looked over at the pile of documents on the table, medical reports, mental evaluations, and the notarized filings Ari had prepared. Everything was in order. Everything had been verified. It wasn't just paperwork. It was her shield, her defense, against a family that had never truly seen her. Ari stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring, though his usual calm was now tinged with a quiet intensity. He had told her what to expect, but it didn't make the process any easier. The room felt like a courtroom, but more importantly, it was where the final test would unfold. One she'd been preparing for her entire life. Hannah, Brad, and Marcus sat across the room, their eyes flickering nervously toward Delia. It was as if they still hadn't accepted that she wasn't playing by their rules anymore, that she had created a life that was independent of their expectations. She didn't need their validation, not after everything. The judge entered, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. The proceedings began, but Delia didn't pay much attention to the questions being asked. She knew her capacity was being questioned, not just legally, but emotionally. They had tried to make her seem unstable, unpredictable, a woman on the verge of losing everything. But what they underestimated was Delia's resolve. The independent review was a formality, but it was one that Delia knew would silence any doubt. She passed every test, every evaluation, with flying colors. It was as if they had forgotten the person she truly was, the woman who had fought for herself, for her family, for everything that mattered. As the judge called the session to order, she looked over the reports, then turned her gaze to Delia. Her voice rang out clearly in the quiet room. The trust is valid, and so is the woman who made it. Delia's heart pounded in her chest, but she held herself still. It was done. The judge's ruling was final, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't unstable. She was right. Hannah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She stormed out of the room, her face flushed with anger, her hand shaking as she slammed the door behind her. Delia didn't flinch. She had expected this reaction, the dramatic exit from someone who had never understood the meaning of true responsibility. Brad, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair, his arms folded, his expression tight. He looked at Delia, a thin line of tension on his face. "This was never about money," he said, his voice low and flat, as if trying to reason with her. Delia met his gaze, her voice steady and clear. "You're right. It was about presence, which you sold off." Brad's eyes shifted, his jaw tightening, but he didn't respond. Delia saw it, saw the guilt in his eyes, the realization that it had always been about more than just the money. It had been about showing up, about being there when it mattered, and he had never done that. Callie reached over and took Delia's hand, her touch warm and comforting. Delia squeezed her fingers, silently grateful for the support. It had always been Callie, quietly, consistently present. Not for the money, not for anything except the kindness of showing up, just as she had promised. Bobby stood at the back of the room, her hands resting lightly on her hips. When the ruling was made final, she clapped once, quietly but firmly, the sound echoing in the silence of the room. It wasn't a loud, boisterous applause. It was a simple acknowledgement, one that carried with it years of loyalty, of witnessing Delia's fight, her resilience. Delia took a breath, steadying herself. The court had ruled in her favor, but more than that, she had finally owned her life. The past was over. She had closed that door and locked it behind her. The future was hers to shape, one decision at a time. The ballroom was filled with the low hum of conversation as Delia took the stage. She felt the weight of the moment settle over her, the faces of nurses, survivors, and caregivers all focused on her. The room felt both too big and too small at the same time, the spotlight burning hot on her skin. This wasn't about accolades. It wasn't about the applause that was sure to come. It was about the people who had shown up for her when it mattered, the ones who didn't see her illness as a liability, but as a reflection of her strength. She wasn't here to seek validation from a family who hadn't been there when she needed them most. No, this was her moment to speak her truth. She cleared her throat, the microphone picking up the small sound, and the room fell silent. "Care is not an obligation. It's a reflection," Delia began, her voice steady, carrying through the room. She glanced out over the audience, the faces of people who understood what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. "It's a reflection of who we are, of what we choose to give to others, and what we choose to keep for ourselves. And in my journey, I've learned that the people who show up for you, truly show up for you, are the ones who matter." The words hung in the air, weighted and true. Delia felt a shift, a sense of peace flowing through her as she spoke. She wasn't just talking about the people in the room. She was talking about the ones who had stood by her when she was alone, when the world felt like it was crumbling. Those who never judged, never abandoned, never expected anything in return. The applause was immediate, a roar of appreciation that filled the room as nurses and caregivers rose to their feet. Delia stood still, accepting it not as a recognition of her illness, but as a recognition of her survival, of the decisions she had made to keep fighting. This wasn't about being praised for what she'd endured. It was about celebrating the people who made it possible for her to stand there at all. A reporter approached her as the clapping began to fade, microphone in hand. "Delia," she asked, "did your family support you through this journey?" Delia's heart didn't skip a beat. Her eyes didn't waver. My chosen family did, she said, her voice even, resolute. The ones who showed up, the ones who cared. My real family is the one I've built with those who have never left me behind. The reporter nodded, understanding. Delia could feel the weight of the question slipping away as the room's energy shifted around her. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had everything she needed right here. Later that night, back in her quiet home, Delia sat down at her kitchen table. She reached for her phone, a familiar notification lighting up the screen. Marcus had seen the video. He hadn't reached out, of course. He never did when it mattered, but he'd seen it. His silence spoke louder than any words he could have said. Hannah's name appeared in the notification bar next. Delia hesitated for only a moment before clicking it open. A reel titled, "Letting Go of Toxic Bonds," filled the screen. Hannah, in her usual self-assured way, offered a soft smile to the camera, the caption dripping with thinly veiled insinuation. Some relationships are meant to be let go of. Healing starts with boundaries. Delia read it once, then closed her phone, the words fading into the background of her thoughts. Hannah's world, her drama, her need for validation, no longer had a place in Delia's life. Instead, Delia turned her attention to the quiet space around her. The flowers in the garden she had planted, the warmth of the evening sunlight streaming through the window, the peace she had fought so hard for. As she leaned back in her chair, she wrote in her journal, "I am not your storyline. I am my own survival." And in that moment, Delia knew that no matter what happened next, she was finally free. The ringing of the remission bell echoed through the sterile white room. Delia's hand lingered on the metal, her fingers tracing the cool surface. It was a sound she had longed for, yet in the quiet aftermath, she could only hear the beating of her own heart. Callie stood by her side, her presence grounding and steady as ever. Delia felt the weight of the moment, the weight of everything that had led up to this. It wasn't just the end of chemo, it was the end of the years of fear and doubt, the years spent in uncertainty. She had fought, and now, here she was. The room was silent for a moment longer, save for the distant hum of the hospital. Then, a nurse, who had become a familiar face through the endless treatments, offered a gentle smile. "Congratulations, Delia. You did it." The words felt surreal, but they were true. Delia had done it. That evening, Bobby hosted a small celebration in Delia's honor in her own backyard. It wasn't a grand event, but it was everything Delia needed. The air was warm, and the twinkling porch lights cast a soft glow over the gathering. The smell of freshly baked pies lingered in the air, and the sound of music, quiet, soothing, filled the background. Callie was there, of course, as always, standing beside Delia as they moved through the crowd. The nurses, caregivers, and friends who had stood by her were there too. No drama, no fuss. Just people who cared. People who had never left her side. Bobby, with her trademark no-nonsense attitude, made sure everything was in place. Delia was surrounded by love, and for the first time in a long while, she felt completely at ease. No obligations, no expectations, just the people who had always been there, showing up for her because they truly cared. As the evening wore on, Delia felt something shift within her. The weight of the past few years, of illness, fear, and loss, felt lighter. There was an unspoken understanding between her and Callie, a shared history of quiet support, and it was in that understanding that Delia realized how far she had come. The trust, too, had been finalized. Ari had delivered the final copy earlier in the day, and it was now securely tucked away, a symbol of the future Delia had created on her own terms. She had drawn the lines. She had decided who mattered and who didn't. The future she was building was no longer contingent on the whims or expectations of others. Ari's words echoed in her mind. Final language, final line drawn. Later that night, Delia sat alone at her kitchen table, reflecting on everything she had built, everything she had done. Her journal was open in front of her, the pen ready in her hand. She wrote slowly, carefully, the words coming from deep within her. "I am not your storyline. I am my own survival." The simplicity of it struck her, how much those words had taken root in her heart, how much they had come to define her. She wasn't defined by her illness, by her family, by anyone else's narrative. She was defining herself. She had chosen peace. The next morning, Delia woke to a warm sun streaming through her window. She moved to the kitchen, her eyes falling on the tulips in her garden, their vibrant petals blooming with the promise of spring. She knelt beside them, running her fingers along their soft edges, watching the sun kiss the dew off each delicate bloom. Next spring will be beautiful, she whispered to herself, with or without them. It wasn't just about the tulips, it was about everything she had planted, both in her garden and in her life. She had made choices, hard ones, but they had brought her peace. And now, as she stood at the beginning of a new chapter, she knew the future she had chosen would be beautiful, no matter who was there to see it. Delia stood, brushing the dirt from her knees, and smiled. The gates stayed locked. The life stayed open.